So thank you for having us. My name is Sigal Mannheim Katzovich. As was said before, I'm managing director for DSV in Israel. DSV is the third largest transport and logistic company with presence in 90 countries worldwide, 75,000 employees, and $28 billion of revenue. So this panel will be about supply chain, and I think that we have a major part in that. So studies show that about 90% of carbon footprint is coming from supply chain. So today we'll speak about how to reduce emission and material waste along the supply chain, see what the challenges are and what tools we can use and work with to reduce negative climate impact on logistics, as well as the broader context of supply chain. Happy to be with experts in the field to join me in this conversation. So since you were already introduced by the speakers, so I'll go straight forward to the discussions. So we, as a leader in the transport and logistic company, we feel responsible, as was discussed in other panels before. I don't know if you were listening. Companies and corporate should take more responsibility and not wait for others to see it. And in DSV, we have decided to promote all sustainability issues, ESG program. We have a full board led by the company's CEO in order to take full lead of all the initiatives in worldwide. And we have set some targets, science-based targets, to reduce our carbon emission by 40% in scope 1 and 2 and 40% in scope 3 by 2030. In reaching these targets, we have developed an area of tools we'll speak about later, but let's talk first about the challenges of maintaining essential operation while minimizing our impact. So Yaron, please introduce yourself and tell us a little more about the connection between supply chain and negative climate impact.
Hi everyone, Yaron Flint. I lead the technical scouting and onboarding of new technologies at Stanley & Decker. I've been in the innovation industry for quite some time, mostly in the automotive or auto tech industry, led the operations of Continental and Delphi here in Israel. And in Continental, naturally, we had a lot of supply chain issues and ESG, given the fact that we are a tire company, producer. So when we talk about supply chain, I think it's very, very important to distinguish between the different layers. And the first layer is the direct, of course. Me as a company, how do I emit emissions through the vehicles that I run or the factories that I run. Then the indirect, which means basically the emissions that make me work or the fuel that I'm consuming, and the downstream. And I think not a lot of attention is going to the downstream, which means every aspect or raw material that you're buying has its own emission level already and scoring, and it accumulates emissions along the process. So if we in Stanley buy even a small screw, producing it, shipping it, and moving it around creates already a lot of emission on that specific screw, and this accumulates to a lot of course, emission levels that we're trying to reduce. But even when we think about the entire effect that we have, there are things that we need to look at beyond that. Everyone is talking about reducing emission levels and CO2. But there are things like realignment of the supply chain, which means I cannot open a factory now in any country. I just wanted to do that and run it as I want, because there are regulatory and environmental issues that I need to look into. Circular economy means I need to introduce new and exciting tools in order to manage the flow and monitor the flow and understand and get more data on what's going on. Even abusement of workers, which is social, environmental, or deforestation, are also topics that come into account. So it becomes even bigger than exactly what I create as a negative impact on the environment. And it's more of a, what is my footprint in all this ecosystem?
Thank you, Yaron. Liad, tell us a little bit about yourself and your activities as a consultant. How do you support companies in measuring their climate impact along their supply chain? And can you tell us a little more about the challenges in measuring scope 3 emissions, as Yaron also talked about?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me? New for maybe the. Okay, now it's better. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for staying for the last panel. My name is Liad Ortar, and I'm head of Shibolet ESG. Just to make some short introduction, Shibolet ESG is a daughter company of the law firm Shibolet & Co. Probably some of you know, one of the biggest law firms corporate law firms in Israel. And we work with corporation basically in revealing their full spectrum of carbon offsetting all through the supply chain. I think we can refer to that as what we call elephant in the room, which is scope 3. If we look at the carbon emission or carbon footprint of companies, at most of them, scope 3 will be about 95% of the total emissions. Up till now, it was kind of a voluntary approach. You decide how to measure a carbon footprint, scope 1 or 2, basically that are the direct emissions. But now we are phasing out of the voluntary phase and entering a new phase of regulatory, let's say, regulatory carbon accounting. Okay? Regulatory carbon accounting, which means you can go on and count your emissions, but it needs to do in a standardized manner. Okay, it needs to be well attested and everything well documented. What we do with the company is basically prepare what we call a carbon balance sheet. A carbon balance sheet is understanding what are the different phases of carbon emission all through your supply chain, taking account the supply chain it contains. Okay, I think it's me, not the microphone. And we have to take into consideration that supply chain has two directions: upstream, the resources, the raw materials, up to the factory itself, and downstream. And we have to take all of the upstream and downstream carbon revenues into our carbon balance sheet. And this is what we do in everyday life. It could be working with different companies. And we do what we call carbon accounting. Okay? Carbon accounting, because if you look at all the companies around in PLANETech here, at the end of the day, they have a business model, but aside to their business model, they have a carbon model. And the carbon model needs to be supported by the business model. I hope not the other way around. But at the end of the day, we need to prove reduction. We need to set goals, whether it will be net zero or other reduction goals. In a month's time, the Israeli Ministry of Environmental Defense is going to declare a new voluntary carbon register in Israel. So there are a lot of regulations moving forward, whether it would be in the European Union with the different directives, things that are going on in the US, and things are moving out, phasing out from the total voluntary sphere to the well-regulated area.
Thank you. So we see that the challenges in supply chain are massive. I think that all of us, we are in the business of supply chain, but I think that the pandemic has shown us that supply chain is part of the way we live and part of the way we get our food or get our products. And not many understood before that the importance of the supply chain. So, and let's get more practical on what are we doing, because the challenges in the supply chain itself is huge. And now putting inside all this measurement and all this sustainability on all these targets is also another big challenge. I can tell you that in DSV, for example, we've started, as we say, putting the targets, but now measuring. The tools we have tools of measurement using, of course, companies, technology companies. For example, we use now Ecotrans IT, but Ecotransit, but it could be any other company. And of course, we are exploring. We have around 20,000 trucks driving between Europe from country to country at any given time. So we are exploring a lot of alternative fuels for these trucks, because we're not sure that electricity will be the right solution for that. So if anyone in the audience have something to share with us, we have our innovation and sustainability manager here present also. And of course, we already implemented some tools. One example that I can give you is a company called Auri is presenting here in this convention that has developed an AI sensor that detects malfunction in a machine in the supply chain business, mainly in the production line, which is very important. I heard from previous speakers, but this is a time to go into predictive maintenance in many of the areas of supply chain in order to save some of the parts that are moving for no reason. So we're doing a lot in that area. And for that, I would also like to ask you, Yaron, can you tell us about tools you have implemented that support reduction of emission along the supply chain?
Yeah, it's a good question since Stanley basically does tools. So a lot of our tools are basically how do we do things internally? So internally, do we have new design processes? Do we have new raw materials that are less polluting to the environment? Packaging even. I can give an example that we are now using a biodegradable trimmer line. So this kind of seemed like obvious. When you use a trimmer line that is from nylon and splits out in the field, it creates pollution. When you do a biodegradable, then it degrades, so you don't need to pick it up. But also, how do we influence our suppliers? This is very, very important, specifically because in every tool there are hundreds and maybe even more components that go inside. So how do we influence our suppliers to provide a more clearable traceability element of what they're doing? Do they use recycled elements? Do they use raw materials that are less polluting? Things like servers and now traceability. So in Continental, one of the things that we implemented is a very interesting cooperation with an Israeli startup called Security Matters that does a traceability on a molecular level. And then you basically can trace the tires from its origin of the rubber from the trees basically until recycling. So you can trace the entire element of the whole circular economy and see exactly where the tires, where the products came from, and even if you're reusing specific elements from your previous tires.
Amazing. Liad, can you give us an example of how measuring a company's carbon footprint along their value chain has supported them in getting closer to their emission targets?
Yeah, I'll give an example of, but I want to say something a bit more general, just one step before that. I think if you go back to let's say in my course fundamentals of climate change, it was mentioned at the beginning. We look at two different efforts. Let's say the mitigation effort, then that we can relate to in the issue of carbon measurements and how to reduce our carbon footprint all through the supply chain. But the other thing is adaptation. So how do we get ready for the coming future? And it's also extremely important for supply chain, because one of the things that we try to identify beforehand is the issue of climate risk. Okay, climate risk, whether it will be the floods or changing our climatic conditions, and the fact we're not able to grow avocado in the north of Israel or any other agriculture. So I think understanding the full spectrum of influences of climate change is a crucial issue, and that relates to the specific example. One of my clients, as example, is dealing with waste, solid waste from food factories. Okay, from bakeries, from hummus, salads, also cereals and baby food and all of that. And he gets all the waste from these huge factories. And basically, the way that he treats the waste is the alternative for landfilling. So today in Israel, 80% of all the waste that is being generated is diverted to landfill, and landfill is like the worst thing you can do with organic waste, because you get anaerobic digestion, and you get digestion, and then you get methane, and methane is one of the big enemies today in climate change. If you know about the replacement of the GWP for global warming potential of methane, now it's about 80 something. It was 30 something before. And what we did a proper analysis of the carbon footprint that's being generated with the way he treats foods. and basically he takes the wet stream of organic waste and divert that to biogas and then to generate electricity, and the dry food he diverts the crumbs and everything to feed the animal stock. So basically he avoids the landfilling, and by that he reduces dramatically the scope 3 of all the big food factories that divert the waste to his facility, to his company. And I think the way to treat that in a very concrete way, because it was part of a test or a feasibility test, being able to understand whether there is a commercial added value to the fact that he's reducing carbon, and that relates to the whole world of carbon credits. Is there something commercial that can be done out of that reduction? But basically, his own reduction is the reduction also for the scope 3 of his clients or suppliers. So there's basically what we call double or multiple counting. Okay, so the reduction on one tier also reflects directly to the reduction of other other tiers in all through the supply chain. So I think that's like the two major efforts that must be taken very seriously. The one, the adaptation, understanding what are the future risks, whether it be transitional, physical, everything that's coming along, and there's quite a lot of assumptions over there. And the other way is to do our best to mitigate and reduce our footprint with our technology and everything that is offered here in the conference.
So we talked a lot about scope 3 and the challenges of implementing sustainability with our suppliers or partners. I gave the example of Augury, which is, of course, scope 3, as we don't have our own production line, but we assist our customers in this regard to be more sustainable or predictive maintenance, as I said, in their production line, and this gives us the scope 3. But I could tell you that the innovation and sustainability implementation in our own supply chain is very, very challenging. So the adaptation of innovating tools and the adaptation of measurement is always a challenge within our own companies. Yaron, can you tell us more about the challenges you have seen in implementing a new solution in supply chain? Why is it so difficult?
Well, I think the biggest problem is awareness. Most companies are not still aware of the problems that they have in supply chain. Now, this is changing, specifically after COVID. But even after you have an awareness, the dealing with supply chain issues turns very, very fast for a cost reduction or extinguishing fires, rather than how do I save or contribute to the environment, which not necessarily coexist. And even if you're there, you have to remember that a lot of the companies use third parties to run basically the logistics and the supply chain. So you don't have really a control on the third party. You need to make sure that the third party wants to work with you and implement that. So that's a new way of influencing. And if you had everything already kind of bundled together, still there's a lot of problematic of how do you combine the inbound, outbound, and interlogistics all together, which not necessarily have the same systems, the same people, or the same alignment within an organization. So it's all about an awareness, pushing other third parties to work with you, and then how do you enable that internally?
Liad, can you give us a short overview of where things are developing in relation to carbon accounting and regulation?
Yeah, I think as we said, winter is coming. No, I think we're gonna see a new. Milton Friedman said that the role of the business corporation is to earn money as long as he's doing that in accordance when obeying what he said, the rules of the game. And I think the rules of the games are changing. Okay, if we look example of things that are going on in Europe, probably some of you know the CBAM, the carbon adjustment mechanism. Basically, if you want to export any kind of product in the coming future to any European country, you're gonna have to go through a very systematic registry like REACH and like other hazardous chemicals because in Europe they call that a carbon leakage. What do you mean by carbon leakage? That we, example, in Belgium have carbon tax for producing a chair, okay? So the producers of chair in Belgium have to pay for that tax. But if you're exporting or the Belgian guy importing a chair from Israel and you don't have a carbon tax, so basically he's getting a reduction. He's getting a kind of subsidy, basically what we call externalities. But nature is subsidizing the cheap price of the chair, and the Europeans are trying to stop that with this new directive, the CBAM, the new methodology. That say, okay, now you're going to have to report in a standardized way what is the carbon footprint of your chair, and if you wanna export that to Belgium, you're going to have to pay the same tax or similar tax. And why is that? Because at the end of the day, the way that the carbon currently is managed in the world, or will be managed quite soon after Sharm and new roadmap is going to be presented there. What we call the Paris Accord Chapter 3 and Chapter 6, all of those chapters are going to be very well presented. That each and every country have its own what we call NDC, National Determined Commitment, and that's a way that countries are going to manage the carbon balance of their countries, and they all have a carbon commitment. So if you're going to import highly intensive carbon product, whether it will be cement, bricks, tires, whatever it will be, it's going to be all added to the national carbon accounting, and countries are going to start. Hey, why should we pay that carbon that's being emitted in other places? And there are new standards. There's a new standard called about net zero standard being will be published soon for review by ISO, and there's the regulation, and then of course the European Union corporate sustainability reporting directive. So everything is going to be. It's going to get heavy. I know that the business sector always repeats the slogan to reduce regulation on itself, but as it relates to carbon, because we're going to go the other way around.
Oh, but you're talking about government regulation, and that's, we know, takes time and not always in the first mind of everyone. Do you think that corporate regulation can dictate maybe quicker sustainability and carbon emission?
The fact that this is what happens, because if we relate to ESG, I'm not going to give the whole lecture of ESG, but basically ESG has a phase which is a mandatory ESG regulated by countries, and you have voluntary ESG. And ESG is what we call the soft law. Over there we have voluntary work, which is corporate social responsibility. But in the voluntary phase, we have what we call self-regulation of corporations. Like, for example, the Coca-Cola quality system, or Intel knows probably Intel exactly, okay? And these managerial approaches are extremely strong, and also they are global. While at least country regulation are limited to each and every country has its own regulation. But multinationals, corporations are very strong. The efficiency of their managerial attitudes are very, very strong because they are global, and because they are very well audited and scrutinized in each and every place. And if you don't abide to them, and you need to report, and if not, there are the corporate sanctions on them. So I think we're gonna get all of the above. All of the above.
I was talking about it because as DSV being a global company, also listed in the Danish stock exchange, so I think that leaders in each company, corporate companies should take the responsibility and lead the market they are present in. For example, we in supply chain, and be more courageous in upfronting that and talking about it, and not just because we all live in this planet and we have to keep it. So coming to wrapping up the session, so what would be your take-home message to the audience when thinking of how to make supply chain more sustainable? In a short sentence, Yaron?
Yeah, so I think it's something both of you touched. I think a lot of corporations fall for the regulation. They say, I just need to follow regulation, and as long as I follow regulation, I'm okay. But I think we need to do more than that. We need to, as large corporation, drive the regulation forward. We need to be before the regulation. We need to push forward and not really use very easily the words like circular economy, where you talk to a company and they say, yeah, we do circular economy, and then you go into the process and you see it's just linear. So really understand and be aware of what you're trying to do, and be more pro the environment, I think.
Thank you. Liad?
I think the most important thing, especially when there's such a hype around clean tech and you see everything that goes on, I think the most important thing, not to detach, not to release the anchor from the ground, and not fly on this kind of financial market blue zone. I don't know, free sky, free, I don't know, whatever it should be. But at the end of the day, each and every company, each and every startup has to prove case his technology vis-a-vis what happens on the ground, which means the carbon accounting. And not forget that there's a common goal, and the common goal is to reduce the carbon emission of humanity. And that's it. And if we forget that, that's nothing more than a bubble that goes on.
Thank you. So my take with it, that sustainability is not just an investment. It's something that could be also a money saver or a practical tool. And I urge everyone in the audience to look what we can do in the practical way, and not just in high words of CO2 emission or carbon footprint, but look at the tools. And if each of us will do something small for the environment, the whole planet will be better for next generation to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.